Hi everyone, welcome back. So this is part 2 of the How to Compose video series, focusing particularly on GCSE and A-level music, but I suppose you could use this for anything really. Okay, so let's get started with our second topic, which is actually how to compose. What guidelines are there for melodic composition? So let's just open up that handout if I share my screen. Okay, so yeah, here is the handout, Melodic Composition Guidelines. We're going to be focusing on 8-bar melodies. 8-bar melodies are probably a better structure to use when you're composing for the first time. So just to keep your melody nice and balanced and even, and to give it a nice sort of cohesive structure, you don't want to be composing anything just yet that's like 5 or 7 or 11 bars long. So we're going to keep it quite straightforward, quite simplistic as always. So step 1 then is thinking about the structure. A phrase is usually 4 bars in length and they come in pairs to form a musical sentence. You may notice that a lot of the terminologies we're using here we also use in English language, and we're discussing things like cadences, sentences, phrasing. All of these things exist in music as well. So the first 4-bar phrase is like a question phrase, or to give it its technical term, the antecedent phrase. And the second 4-bar phrase is the answer to that phrase, or the consequent, to use the technical term. So the first question phrase could end on an imperfect cadence. So if we're in the key of, say, C major or something, you maybe want to end on chord 5 of C major, which is a G major chord. And the second answer phrase could end on a perfect cadence, so taking us back home to chord 1. A perfect cadence would be like your chord 5 to your chord 1, so something like this. Nice chord 5 to chord 1. Okay, so thinking about the harmonic structure is a good place to start. And you can see here that I've just got this 8 bars already sort of drawn out. I've used phrase marks here as well to let us see where does our first phrase begin and end, where does our second phrase begin and end, and our first question phrase should probably end on some sort of imperfect cadence, or maybe an interrupted cadence or something. But an imperfect cadence ending on chord 5 makes the music sound, or it is going to make the music sound unfinished, that there needs to be more that comes after that. And of course, that's going to be the answer phrase right after. So the second step, or step 2, the melodic motif. A motif is a short melodic or rhythmic idea which gives character to a melody. It's a good idea to have a motif based on the first chord, or chord 1. So yeah, I probably will start bar 1 on chord 1 just to establish the key right away, that we're in the key of C major. Doesn't have to be in C major, but yeah, that's what we're going to do just for this example. So yeah, chord 1 on bar 1 for the first main beat of the first bar. If there is an upbeat or an anacrusis that you want in your melody, it might be a good idea to harmonize that upbeat with chord 5. So it's a nice sort of lead in to the first main beat of your first full bar. So chord 5 going to chord 1. But because we don't have an upbeat or an anacrusis here, we're just going to start immediately with chord 1. Choose a rhythm and time signature to fit the character of the melody. For a soft, gentle character, a slow 6/8 time might be suitable. So that's what we're going to go for in this example. So you can see here, this is the motif that we're going to use, and all of the notes in this motif are just from chord 1. So you can see how having a good harmonic structure that's been suggested underneath your melody is a good idea, because it helps you come up with notes and things. And the rhythm that we have here in 6/8 is very straightforward. It is just quavers and dotted crotchet. Here it is again. Oops. There we go. Okay, so that's our little motif that we're going to use for the rest of the melody. For step 3, let's develop this first phrase rhythm that we have. So we have this da 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 dum, and we're going to repeat that in our second bar. Okay, so again, I said this before in the last video when we were talking about melodic motion, that you probably don't want anything too complicated just yet. You don't want lots of, double dotted notes and lots of syncopated rhythms and use of semiquavers everywhere. You want to just keep it nice and straightforward to begin with, and then you can add all that stuff in later. So for now, we're just going to keep our rhythms very, very simplistic, and we're going to actually just establish that rhythm from bar 1 by repeating it in bar 2. We can add some variety for the next 2 bars, for bars 3 and 4. As the first 2 bars stop on dotted crotchet notes, continuing with quicker movement to direct the melody towards the first cadence of bar 4 might be a good idea. So yeah, we have this ba 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 bum, da 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 dum, da 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 dum. So there's a little bit of a speed up rhythmically anyway. It speeds up a little in bar 3 to lead us into that cadence at bar 4, which we know from step 1, that's going to be our imperfect cadence. So we're going to end on a chord 5 there at this part. What about the second phrase of this musical sentence? What are we going to do for the bars 5, 6, 7, and 8? Well, we're just going to repeat what we did for bars 1 to 4. To have some sort of relationship between those 2 phrases might be a good idea as well. Again, that sort of helps bring the whole melody, or it will help bring the whole melody closer together and make it sound like it is actually an entire cohesive melody. One of the mistakes that a lot of students, especially for GCSE and A level, make is that when they're composing, they'll start on the first bar and just immediately start writing notes, very complicated rhythms and notes, and then move on to bar 2, move on to bar 3, and they just work their way through it chronologically. But bar 3 has no relationship to bar 1, and bar 5 has no relationship to bar 4. There isn't any sort of sense that there's a direction or a purpose or a structure to their melody. So we want to avoid that by suggesting a harmonic structure, but also suggesting a rhythmic structure, that there's some sort of relationship between the second phrase and the first phrase. And that's what we have here, a very close relationship, because it is just copying exactly the same rhythm as before. Okay, so for step 5, the chord progression stage, is where it gets a little bit more complicated, I suppose. You need to work out a proper harmonic foundation for the melody, which is extremely important. Even though you are concentrating on composing a melody, the melody should suggest some type of harmonic framework or harmonic structure or chord progression underneath it. I know that this is very restrictive, because what happens if you want to compose in sort of a more modern style or more advanced style than this? You can, of course, but I'm only going to show you guys how to do this for sort of GCSE and A level standard, where they don't want you to be composing anything too experimental. So they kind of want you to wait until you get to university before doing that, where you're going to find your own unique voice, I suppose. So we don't want to be doing anything too avant-garde here. So we are going to be writing something that's tonal, that's going to be using probably very regular rhythms and time signatures and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, we're not going to do anything too advanced, harmonically speaking. At least not until we get way into the composition, when I'll show you guys a little bit more about chromatic harmony and how do we add in more chromatic chords like your Neapolitan chord or augmented sixth chords or secondary function chords. So we will look at that much later on. Okay, so a good, strong harmonic foundation. Your melody should imply a proper musical progression of chords. First, find approach chords to the cadences. The first 4 bars, there we go, are going to end on an imperfect cadence. So it could be any chord here in bar 3 that's going to approach this chord in bar 4. So we could choose any chord, but I'm just going to choose chord 1. I'm going to keep it quite tonic and dominant over these 8 bars. It doesn't get more simplistic than this, to be honest. So an imperfect cadence here, I'm going to use chord 1 to 5, but you could have put in chord 2 to 5 or 4 to 5 or 6 to 5, you know, any sort of chord progression there. Or later on, you could make it one of your chromatic chords, like a Neapolitan chord or an augmented sixth chord, but we'll deal with that much later. And chord 5 would work well at bar 2 as well. So we start on chord 1, which we kind of decided way back in step 1 that was going to be a tonic harmony. And we've already got chord 5 from that step as well. And we've just worked out that 1 to 5 will sound good. Well, we can't really have 1 to 1 to 1 because that's kind of too simplistic, you know, that you're not changing harmony at all. So we're going to harmonize bar 2 with another chord 5. So there's a 1-5, 1-5 relationship over your first 4 bars. The second 4 bars end on a perfect cadence. So again, we probably have to put in we do have to put in a chord 5 here, going to chord 1, because that is our perfect cadence. You can't change those chords at all. So our perfect cadence to end our melody is going to end with a 5 at bar 7 and chord 1 at bar 8. The chord that I've chosen for bar 6 is chord 4, just for the sake of variety. We could have put a chord 2 in there as well, or maybe a chord 6 or something, but 4 or 2 are really good predominant chords that come before chord 5. So just for the sake of variety, I'm going to switch it up a bit here. And that's all going to be approached by another chord 1 to start the phrase. So at least the 2 phrases will start with the same harmony, even though harmonically speaking, they do sort of get quite different after that. Okay, so that's the harmony that we're going to suggest under our melody. And we've also already worked out the rhythm as well. If we go back to step 4, there's really not much more you have to do other than make sure that you don't go too far with your development just yet. We haven't come across melodic development yet. So we want to keep our melody simple. So don't make it too advanced. So let's complete the melody. Step 6. Design a melody using the chords and the completed rhythm from step 4. Avoid awkward intervals and leaps. So again, I'm going to be probably suggesting, if you haven't already watched the Melodic Motion video, go back and watch that. Those certain guidelines you have to keep in mind when you're writing a tonal melody, I suppose. So yeah, have a look at the Melodic Motion video or the Melodic Motion handouts if you're part of the course that I teach. And think of the chords in inverted patterns as well. So it's not always going to be, the same sort of movement every time. I mean, we can do like chord 1 here is harmonized. Starting on the E. The lowest note in the chord, the lowest note in the bar, though, is that C. Okay, so you probably could say that this bar is a root position chord 1. And for bar 2, we've got the same idea, although if we look to see what the lowest note is, it's now B. So maybe we could think of that bar as like a chord 5 first inversion, with the B as the lowest note. So that's what I mean by think about chords in inverted patterns. So it's not just going to move like this. It's not the greatest movement in your melody. So we're still harmonizing that chord 5. Yep, but we're going to be using like an inversion of it, a different sort of approach to it. So the whole thing would be there we go. We can use some decorative notes. I will be making a video about non-harmony notes, so things like auxiliary notes or neighbor notes, suspensions, passing notes, neighbor groups, appoggiaturas, anticipations, pedal notes, all that sort of stuff. So there's quite a few different types of non-harmony notes that we can use. In other words, notes that don't belong to the chords that we've worked out. So to use some decorative notes will be a good idea. You don't want it to be 100% harmonic or, just outlining arpeggios and triads all the time. So even though our first 2 bars do that, you don't want all 8 bars just to be like this. So we'll just give a little bit more interest. So for the rest of that phrase, we've got chord 1 again, our C, E, G chord, in the case C major. So we do start with a G, we've got a C, we've got 2 E's, but notice we've also got a D and an F. And this rhythm, of course, we've already worked out from step 4. But notice that we've got a passing note, a note that connects 2 different harmony notes together, C and the E. And we also have an auxiliary note, or as they call it in America, the neighbor note, the neighbor tone. And that goes from a harmony note up or down to the neighbor note and then back to the same harmony note again. That's the difference between auxiliary notes and passing notes. One connects 2 different harmony notes and the other will always return back to the same harmony note again. So the C and the E are connected by the passing note D, but the E and the E, the same note, are connected by that auxiliary note there, that F. So let's have a wee listen to our first 4-bar phrase, I suppose. Yeah, and notice that we're ending on a long dotted minim on bar 4. That D belongs to the chord 5 that we're using for that bar. It's a GBD chord and we're using the D. We could have used the G, we could have used the B, but because we're kind of moving sort of stepwise motion here at the end, the easiest note to get to would have been the D. Yeah, so just to sort of have a little bit of contrast from the triadic or arpeggiated 2 bars at the beginning, we've got a little bit more stepwise or scalic motion going on here. And again, that refers back to our previous video about melodic motion, that you do want to have a nice sort of curve in your melody as well. You don't want too many leaps, but you also don't want too many steps either. Okay, so it's sort of a nice balance of those first 4 bars there. It is common for the opening of the second phrase to repeat the opening of the first phrase. So our second 4-bar phrase, we're probably going to use the same bar or the same melodic material as we did for bar 1. Consider the overall range of your melody. It should not be too narrow. Okay, so you don't want it just within like the span of a fifth, perfect fifth. And even an octave may be considered a little bit restrictive. So usually a good idea is to, over those 8 bars, try to make sure that your lowest note of that 8-bar melody and your highest note of that 8-bar melody are more than an octave apart, just to give it a bit of range. And you can do that by putting a curve in your melody, so the listener is taken on a musical journey. Okay, just like you do the same thing when we talk about chord progressions as well. You go home to your tonic key and you leave your tonic key into other keys, and you may modulate into other keys, and then hopefully at some stage you'll get back to your original tonic key or your home key. It's the same thing for melody as well, albeit maybe on a much smaller scale. You want to sort of take the listener on a journey that you're leaving somewhere and then you're going off on an adventure or something, and then you're coming back again. You're arriving home again. This can be easily done by introducing a climax point about 3/4 of the way through your 8-bar phrase. Now, for me, that's usually around about bar 6. Doesn't have to be exactly 3/4 of the way through. Some people do it actually getting much closer to the end of the 8 bars. So they might do it on bar 7 or something. But for me, I'm going to do it on bar 6. So how do you sort of introduce a point of climax? Well, there's a number of ways you can do that. You could have your highest note, you could have your longest note, or you could have your loudest note. Some sort of extreme happens at that point of climax, or maybe a combination of all 3. Your loudest, your highest, and your longest note all happening at the same time on bar 6. Or maybe you want the opposite of that. Maybe you want your quietest, your lowest note to be around bar 6. Anything that draws attention to bar 6 or 3/4 of the way through, or at least somewhere in your melody, getting towards the end of the melody, I suppose, you do want something to happen. The music gets higher, gets louder, gets lower or quieter, gets the longest note, or something happens. I've also introduced a new harmony. That's why I've got chord 4 there as well. So that should just sort of indicate like a little change, something new has happened here, compared to all the tonic dominant harmony we've already had. So, and you can also see that our bar 5 is the same as bar 1, because as I say, it is common for the opening of the second phrase to repeat the same idea that you had for the opening of your first phrase. And again, that brings a bit more unity and structure to your melody. So here are the first 8 bars, I suppose, of this melody. And we're still not done though, but I will change it a wee bit. But just to let you hear the basic structure, the basic outline of it. And that's it. So notice that was the highest point. And it outlines our chord 4, our F major chord. So yeah. Yeah, so it's very simplistic, but we do want it to be simplistic, as of course we don't want anything too advanced yet. Use non-harmonic decorative notes in your second phrase as well. So you can see there's a couple of little extra things I put in there, like cambiata, or another auxiliary note is in there too. So yeah, there are only 1, 2, 3, sort of 4 non-harmony notes over those 8 bars. So if you wanted to, you could leave it like that, at least for the first time that you're introducing the melody in your composition. But at some stage, you may want to develop that melody through decoration and have more non-harmony notes in there. So yeah, you could introduce melodic development at some stage in your composition as well. Analyze the rhythmic, pitch, and intervallic patterns of the melody as the basis for the rest of the composition. So the rhythm, you could change some of the rhythms around or make the rhythm a bit more advanced. The pitches as well, analyze those and see, can you come up with something similar for E, C, G, G later on in the melody? And you may want to just develop the first bar and use it as like an ascending sequence or something. Or the intervallic patterns, so like the idea of the major third going up to a perfect fifth. We could transpose that into another key. So yeah, these are all ideas for developing your melody later on. Inversion is usually a good way to add variety but maintain a sense of unity. So we do have the same sort of idea in the first 2 bars here in our original melody, where the melody went down and then up. Okay, so we had this. And then bar 2 is more or less the same, but it's based on a different chord. Yeah, but what happens if we introduce some inversion? So the melody doesn't go down a third and then up. Here it's going to go up and then down. So the same notes are going to be used, just in a slightly different order. And it creates this sort of feeling of inversion, that we've sort of turned everything upside down. Could be another way of doing it. You got to be careful though what note that we've ended on there. That's the leading note, and that wants to leading note rising up to the tonic. So if you're not sure of that rule, do have a look at the tendency tones section in the previous video that we were looking at for melodic motion. Okay, so that's one idea, maybe inversion. Adding far more melodic decoration at some point will make that melody much more interesting and give it a good, unique character. So we're going to add more passing notes, auxiliary notes, appoggiatures, even maybe some suspensions, suggestion of suspensions at least. So here is that 8-bar melody again, but this time we've introduced quite a lot of new non-harmony notes. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, as opposed to the... how many did we have before? 4? So yeah, we've almost quadrupled the number of non-harmony notes there. So here is the new melody, what it sounds like. Yeah, so a little bit more interesting, that little run at the start. Instead of... So yeah, it has changed quite a bit from what it once was. So as I say, I will be releasing a video as well on non-harmony notes and how to use them. But at this stage, all you really need to come up with is just a good, strong, simplistic, solid, cohesive melody that lasts 8 bars, suggests a good harmonic progression underneath, has the feeling of an imperfect cadence followed by a perfect cadence, and has quite a bit of relationship between one phrase and the other, that the two phrases aren't very different. They should be related to each other quite a bit. Here they're related harmonically, rhythmically, and even melodically, that I am using bar 1 again at the start of the second phrase. Even maybe a little harmonic decoration can also be implied. For example, at the imperfect cadence in bar 4, a second inversion chord, a 1C chord, could be used with the chord 5, because maybe having a big long dotted minim on that bar does bring the melody to sort of a standstill. So you may want to sort of make the melody feel as if it is progressing on a little bit more. So we could change that bar 4 to something a little bit more advanced by suggesting second inversion chord 1 to a root position chord 5. So like a cadential 6/4, in other words, for that bar 4. So here it is with the 1C this time. So the melody that's being used there and the harmony that's implied could be like this. Or you could even have... Radio. Well, hopefully that will give you some ideas of how to come up with like a little small motif, how to come up with a very simplistic rhythm, and also quite a simplistic harmonic progression. That is very important, that you're thinking of the structure, the harmonic structure and the rhythmic structure before you start putting down a whole load of notes for your melody. You need to have a good idea of where the melody is going to go before you start actually writing anything. Otherwise, you are just going to end up, or the chances are that you're going to end up with bar 1 sounds completely different to bar 2, sounds completely different to bar 3. There isn't any relationship between them. You do want to have some sort of feeling of unity throughout your melody, at least for the sake of composing for GCSE and A-level music exams as well. Everything that I've said, you could probably, find a million examples that don't follow this at all. But there are, I suppose, a million examples that do. Have a very good look at music from the classical period, especially people like Mozart. You do have very strong balanced phrases in his music as well. So that's, the sonata, the piano sonata in C, of course. So it's... And then that is answered by, that's the question phrase, what's the answer? And very simple little harmony there as well. So it's like a chord 1 and then like a dominant 7th chord. Back to chord 1. Okay, so that's 7-step approach to composing a melody. If you follow it and come up with your own ideas, and of course you're always going to go back and refine and refine and refine. Don't think that as soon as you've come up with an 8-bar melody that's okay, that's it, I'm never have to look at that melody again. You may want to go back over it a good few times, and maybe tweak a little bit here and there, introduce more non-harmony notes, or maybe take a few out if you think it's too complicated. Maybe beef up the rhythm a bit, or make it a bit more simplistic if there's a lot going to go on in your music. It depends what you're writing for. Okay, so guys, hopefully that's given you a little bit more help on how to come up with a melody. So this handout on melodic composition, or this video on melodic composition, taken together with the other video on melodic motion, there should be plenty of things there, plenty of guidelines to get you started. And yeah, let me know how you get on. And if you have any questions or any suggestions, just leave a comment under the video and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. And I'll see you again next time.